Good evening, my name is Letitia and welcome to tonight's segment of the project. On tonight's episode, we will be discussing the trend of Australian coffee shops in New York City, how this trend began and evolved, and the reasonings behind it. You will hear from an interviewer, Julia Hyatt, who is a local New Yorker, who will share her experiences on the topic. But firstly, to give our interview some background, in recent years, there has been a global shift towards healthy, sustainable, and fresh produce. This has diverted away from the all-American trend of large-sized portion foods, and in particular, the American breakfast diner trend. The number of Australian cafes has skyrocketed in the last decade and has now expanded to even Australian bars and eateries across New York. Several sources state that there is no coincidence in the timing of the Australian coffee shop boom in New York City. To give our viewers a little background, in 2005, Prime Minister John Howard negotiated a special visa for Australians, the E3 visa. This vastly increased the number of Australians locating to NYC, and subsequently, these Australian expats decided to set up Australian coffee shops in New York City. Many of these Australian expats have been setting the benchmark for coffee in New York, which has proven to be very successful so far. With regard to the New York City cafe culture, New York City is famous for its bagels and cream cheese, donuts, and drip coffee for breakfast. Given that a lot of the American classic-style diners have closed in New York, the opportunity has opened for Australian cafes to serve simple and solid breakfasts and Australian specialty coffees, such as the flat white. Bluestone Lane in New York is considered the top Australian coffee shop. In 2018, it was valued as a $20 million business and is just one of the examples of the great success of the Australian coffee shop integration in New York. In 2010, the New York Times described a flat white as a cult drink, whose popularity was not likely to spread rapidly. However, by 2014, the popularity of the flat white had spread through New York. To give our viewers just a few examples of some of the Australian-style coffee shops in New York, firstly, Bluestone Lane, which I previously mentioned, was established by an Australian AFL player turned New York banker, Nick Stone, who missed the Melbourne cafe culture in New York City and decided to do something about it. In 2014, Nick opened Bluestone Lane. Bluestone is now located across several different locations across Manhattan and also around the US. Bluestone has 5 full-service cafes in New York City, which serve brunch and lunch, and also an additional 11 coffee shops, which purely focus on serving coffee drinks and avocado on toast. Another example is the cafe Two Hands in New York, which is popular for its famous cappuccino with powdered chocolate and the Australian Tim Tam. Another example is Little Collins, which is located near Central Park. This cafe serves Australian staples such as avo on toast, feta smash, and even Vegemite on toast. Lastly, one of the other examples of Australian cafes which has taken off in New York is Sweatshop, located in Brooklyn. The owners of Sweatshop are originally from Melbourne, and their menu includes Australian delights such as Vegemite on toast, Jaffles, and the Australian flat white. I will now transfer you live over to Julia Hyatt, who talks to us from New York to share some of her experiences with the Australian cafe culture in New York and her thoughts surrounding this. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Letitia. I'm Julia Hyatt here with 20-year-old local New Yorker Paige Lorenda.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. So I just have a few questions for you. To begin, are you much of a coffee drinker?
Yeah, I have like 4 cups a day.
Good answer. I'm a coffee lover myself. How would you describe your average coffee shop experience in the Big Apple?
Well, during the week, I usually just run into Starbucks quickly to get caffeine before work. But on the weekends, my friends and I like to try to hang out in the cafe, but it gets too busy.
Now, if you could describe your ideal coffee shop experience, what would that look like?
I'd like to be somewhere with a more relaxed atmosphere where I could have conversations with my friends or just enjoy my coffee.
Then it sounds like you and your friends would love Australian-style cafes, and more are coming to your area soon. Thank you for your time. It was nice chatting, Paige.
Thanks, can't wait to try the cafes.
And that concludes this episode of The Project. Stay tuned for next week. Welcome back. I'm Julia Hyatt, and I'm checking in with local New Yorker Paige Lorendo. Hi, Paige. So now that you and your friends have tried Australian-style cafes, what are your thoughts? Do you like it more or less than American style?
My friends and I went Saturday morning and we loved it. We spent 2 hours sipping and chatting and we want to go again this weekend.
I'm happy to hear that. My friends and I love them as well. What are the major differences you observed between the two styles?
Well, it was a bit pricey, but it was worth it for the high quality. They made my espresso for my flat white right after I ordered it, and I think that the Aussie cafes are way more relaxing.
That sounds like what I've seen as well. Thank you for your input, Paige. And that concludes today's episode of Project. Thanks for tuning in.